On his wedding day, the terrifying Alpha of the North opened the wrong letter. It was his perfect bride's secret confession to murder. Instead of saying his vows, the Duke ordered her execution right at the altar. Then, the most feared predator in the kingdom walked past his screaming ex-bride, stopped before her abused, ragged younger sister, and dropped to one knee. "Take your rightful place as my true Luna," he commanded. The heavy oak doors of the grand cathedral slammed shut. The echoing boom sealed the fate of the Northern Pack forever. Duke William stood motionless at the high altar. He was an Alpha of terrifying, unmatched presence. His exceptionally tall and strong frame completely dominated the sacred space. Short, immaculate hair framed his sharp, ruthlessly handsome features. A perfectly tailored black military uniform clung tightly to his muscular build. Golden medals of conquest rested heavily against his broad chest. High-contrast sunlight pierced sharply through the vaulted stained glass windows. It cast bloody red and vibrant gold shadows across his imposing shoulders. Today was supposed to be the most joyous day of his reign. He was meant to bind his soul to Victoria. She was the prized, supposedly flawless daughter of the Silver Moon clan. But a trembling, pale servant had just interrupted the sacred silence. The messenger handed him a heavily sealed piece of ancient parchment. It bore a deep crimson wax seal that was never meant for his eyes. William broke the brittle seal with a single, brutal snap of his fingers. The bitter scent of crushed wolfsbane and dark deception wafted from the hidden paper. He slowly unfolded the thick, heavily creased parchment. His piercing golden eyes rapidly scanned the elegant yet hurried handwriting. An unnatural, suffocating silence gripped the vast cathedral. Thousands of elite, aristocratic guests instinctively held their breath. They watched the Alpha Duke's expression morph with terrifying speed. The cold indifference on his face shifted into absolute, catastrophic fury. The intercepted letter was directly addressed to the rogue commander of the southern borders. It was penned by Victoria, his beautiful and allegedly innocent bride. The venomous words written on the page constituted a blatant death warrant. She detailed exactly how she planned to poison William's wine on their wedding night. She shamelessly bragged about blinding the great Alpha with her false submission. But the most devastating part was buried in the final, cramped paragraph. Victoria openly mocked the sacred memory of William's brutally murdered younger brother. She gleefully confessed to orchestrating the bloody assassination herself. She then revealed how she had flawlessly framed her own younger sister for the heinous crime. A low, guttural growl began to vibrate deep within William's chest. The terrifying sound actually cracked the polished marble floor beneath his heavy leather boots. Victoria chose that exact, fateful moment to begin her walk down the grand aisle. She wore a magnificent gown crafted from pure, shimmering white silk. A triumphant, arrogant smile played delicately on her brightly painted lips. She falsely believed she had finally won the ultimate prize of the North. She had absolutely no idea that the Supreme Alpha already held her signed execution order. William crushed the damning letter in his massive, battle-scarred hand. The thick veins in his strong neck corded instantly with suppressed, lethal rage. He simply could not wait for the traitor to reach the altar. He marched aggressively down the velvet runner like an apex predator locking onto its prey. The joyous wedding march rapidly dissolved into a chaotic, terrifying dissonance. Terrified musicians abruptly stopped playing as the Duke's raw killing intent flooded the stagnant air. Victoria's confident smile faltered and died in a fraction of a second. She suddenly sensed the lethal, suffocating shift in her mate's dominant pheromones. "My lord," she whispered. Her normally sweet voice trembled violently with sudden, overwhelming dread. He stopped his advance mere inches from her trembling form. His towering, muscular shadow completely engulfed her petite, fragile frame. He viciously threw the crumpled letter directly at her chest. It bounced harmlessly off her pristine white dress and landed on the blood-red carpet. Read your own sins, William commanded. His voice was deceptively soft. Yet it echoed through the massive hall with the devastating force of rolling thunder. Victoria looked down at the broken, distinctive wax seal lying near her silk shoes. Every ounce of warm color instantly drained from her beautiful, treacherous face. Her weak knees completely buckled beneath the weight of her exposed guilt. She collapsed heavily onto the hard floor. She began desperately choking on her own sudden, consuming panic. Loud gasps of horror erupted simultaneously from the aristocratic crowd. Absolutely no one dared to move a single muscle. No one was foolish enough to challenge the enraged, fully awakened Alpha. William looked completely past the pathetic, trembling traitor weeping at his feet. His glowing golden eyes locked onto the absolute back of the cavernous cathedral. Standing alone in the darkest, coldest corner was Eleanor. She was hidden away among the lowest-ranking servants of the household. She was young, breathtakingly beautiful, and ruthlessly cast aside by her own corrupt family. She wore faded, tattered rags that utterly failed to hide her natural, regal grace. Her luminous, watchful eyes suddenly met William's fierce, searching gaze. Despite the endless, crushing abuse she had suffered for years, her posture remained unbreakable. She possessed a quiet, fierce resilience that commanded absolute respect. William felt a sudden, violent, undeniable pull deep within his soul. The true mating bond roared instantly to life. It had been deliberately buried under years of toxic lies and sinister deceit. The weeping traitor on the floor had almost cost him his one true destined mate. William pointed a rigid, commanding finger at the sobbing Victoria. "Arrest this treacherous creature immediately," he coldly ordered his elite royal guards. Heavy iron boots rushed forward urgently to drag the screaming, disgraced bride away from the altar. William then deliberately stepped over the discarded, ruined wedding veil. He walked with absolute purpose straight toward the shadowed, forgotten corner of the room. The terrified crowd quickly parted for him. He stopped directly in front of the outcast Eleanor. The young, stunning woman did not flinch or look away. She looked fiercely up at the towering, muscular Alpha with quiet, unyielding defiance. William shocked the entire room by slowly kneeling on one knee. It was a gesture of supreme submission that stunned the entire Northern Pack into absolute silence. "I was about to make the most devastating mistake of my entire life," he confessed softly. His deep, resonant voice was entirely raw with sudden, overwhelming reverence. "Come with me now, Eleanor." He gently offered his massive, calloused hand to the beautiful outcast. "Take your rightful place as my true Luna." The sheer impossibility of the scene completely paralyzed the grand cathedral. A supreme Alpha Duke was kneeling respectfully before a ragged, forgotten outcast. Eleanor stared cautiously down at William's massive, battle-scarred hand. She had spent her entire life being completely invisible and brutally marginalized. Her own biological family had treated her far worse than a feral stray. Now, the most feared predator in the entire kingdom was explicitly offering her a crown. A furious, indignant roar suddenly shattered the stunned, heavy silence of the hall. It came directly from Lord Silas, the deeply arrogant patriarch of the Silver Moon clan. He was the biological father of both the treacherous bride and the abused outcast. His face was flushed a deep, ugly purple with aristocratic outrage and profound humiliation. "This is an absolute and unforgivable outrage, Your Grace," Silas bellowed across the room. He marched aggressively forward with his ornate ceremonial sword clanking loudly against his thigh. "You absolutely cannot replace my prized eldest daughter with this pathetic, useless stain." He pointed a disgustingly dismissive and cruel finger directly at his youngest child. "She is weak, utterly uncultured, and completely unfit to ever bear the sacred title of Luna." Eleanor flinched backward instinctively out of deeply ingrained, painful habit. Years of harsh physical and emotional abuse had taught her to deeply fear his booming voice. But before she could retreat back into the comforting shadows, William finally moved. He did not even bother to stand up from his deeply submissive kneeling position. He merely turned his head slowly to glare sharply at the rapidly approaching patriarch. A terrifying, suffocating wave of pure, dominant alpha energy exploded outward from his muscular body. The invisible, crushing pressure hit Lord Silas like a solid, unyielding brick wall. The older, arrogant werewolf choked violently on his own breath and dropped heavily to his knees. He was physically completely crushed by the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of William's lethal aura. "You dare speak to your future Luna in that disrespectful tone?" William whispered coldly. His voice was dangerously low, yet it vibrated menacingly inside everyone's very bones. "You willfully allowed my younger brother's true murderer to sleep comfortably under your roof. You stood by blindly while an innocent young girl was cruelly blamed for your clan's treachery. The Silver Moon clan currently owes the North a massive, unpayable debt of blood. If you dare speak another word against my mate, I will personally collect that debt today." Complete, terrifying, and absolute silence immediately returned to the massive sacred space. Lord Silas lowered his head in deep shame, physically unable to meet the Duke's glowing eyes. William turned his undivided attention back to the trembling, beautiful woman standing before him. His harsh expression instantly softened from lethal, cold rage to profound, genuine reverence. "You are completely safe now," he promised her with quiet, absolute, unwavering certainty. Eleanor looked incredibly deep into his intense, unblinking golden gaze. She saw absolutely no pity, no hidden deception, and no underlying cruelty in his eyes. She only saw a fierce, uncompromising loyalty that both terrified and deeply thrilled her. Slowly, fighting her own internal terror, she reached out her thin, scarred hand. Her small, delicate fingers gently brushed against his rough, calloused palm. The exact moment their skin touched, a literal, powerful shockwave rippled violently through the stagnant air. The ancient mating bond snapped fully and permanently into place with blinding, magical intensity. A sudden, overwhelming rush of pure warmth flooded Eleanor's perpetually freezing, fragile body. She gasped softly aloud as centuries of ancient wolf magic instantly recognized their rightful union. William carefully and protectively closed his large hand securely around her delicate fingers. He stood up tall, effortlessly and gently pulling her close to his protective side. He deliberately positioned his towering, muscular frame as an impenetrable physical shield between her and the hostile crowd. "Hear me now and remember this well," William announced loudly to the terrified aristocratic assembly. "Eleanor is the true, destined, and only Luna of the vast northern pack. Any attack on her reputation is a direct, unforgivable act of war against me." From the distant, echoing subterranean corridors, a hysterical, blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It was the disgraced Victoria being violently dragged down to the damp, lightless dungeons. "You are all going to burn for this," the ruined bride shrieked wildly into the darkness. "The Shadow Council will never let you keep the Northern Throne, William." Her chilling, desperate words echoed ominously against the ancient, cold stone walls. It was a stark, brutal reminder that the dangerous conspiracy was far from over. The treacherous Victoria was clearly merely a small pawn in a much larger, deadlier political game. William's sharp jaw tightened imperceptibly at the unexpected mention of the Shadow Council. He knew exactly what kind of ruthless, hidden enemies constantly lurked in the dark. But as he looked down softly at his resilient, stunningly beautiful new bride, his resolve only hardened. He would gladly and ruthlessly burn the entire civilized world to ash just to protect her. Eleanor gently squeezed his large hand, sensing the sudden, dangerous shift in his intense mood. She was no longer the fragile, easily broken abused victim hiding pathetically in the corner. She was a hardened survivor who had finally just found her ultimate, unyielding protector. The high priests of the Grand Cathedral nervously approached the newly formed, intimidating couple. They held out the sacred, silver ceremonial chalice filled to the brim with pure moon-blessed water. Usually, the official binding ceremony strictly required days of elaborate preparation and silent fasting. But the imposing Duke was clearly in absolutely no mood for tedious, traditional formalities today. He snatched the heavy silver chalice directly from the trembling hands of the eldest, terrified priest. He brought the jeweled rim to his own lips and took a deep, deliberate, respectful swallow. He then immediately offered the cold cup to Eleanor with a silent, highly encouraging nod. She grasped the ornate, chilling metal securely with both of her small, trembling hands. She drank the sweet, freezing water, officially and magically sealing the unbreakable, eternal pact. A brilliant, glowing golden mark slowly began to manifest perfectly on the side of her elegant neck. It was the ancient, undisputed crest of the Northern Pack, a fiercely stylized dire wolf. Loud gasps of pure, unadulterated shock erupted simultaneously from the lords and ladies watching below. The sacred mark of the Luna rarely ever appeared so quickly or so incredibly vividly. It definitively proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the moon goddess highly favored this union. Silas, still kneeling helplessly on the marble floor, let out a choked, pathetic sob of utter defeat. His grand master plan to fully control the rich north through Victoria was completely, utterly ruined. He had foolishly and cruelly discarded the true, undeniable jewel of his own ancient bloodline. William quickly wrapped a heavy, velvet, deeply fur-lined cloak securely around Eleanor's shivering, fragile shoulders. The rich, intoxicating scent of pine and fresh leather instantly enveloped her heightened senses. It smelled exactly like pure safety, a foreign concept she had never truly understood until this exact moment. "We are officially leaving this wretched, cursed place," William declared loudly to the completely silent crowd. "My new Luna requires immediate rest, and I have treacherous prisoners to violently interrogate." He did not pause to wait for any polite, customary bows or traditional farewells from the stunned guests. He simply turned his broad back completely on the absolute highest society of the entire kingdom. He gently guided Eleanor straight toward the massive side doors leading directly to the royal carriage. The elite, heavily armed royal guards quickly formed an impenetrable circle of steel around them. Their drawn, razor-sharp swords gleamed menacingly under the high, colorful cathedral lights. Eleanor walked steadily with her head held surprisingly high, drawing raw strength directly from her powerful mate. She knew intimately that the upcoming transition from an abused servant to a ruler would be incredibly perilous. The royal court in the snowy capital was a treacherous, deadly swamp of endless deceit and raw ambition. Victoria's hidden political allies would undoubtedly try desperately to assassinate her before the fast-approaching winter solstice. But as she glanced sideways at the imposing, flawlessly muscular Alpha striding beside her, all her fear simply vanished. She was finally entirely ready to stop hiding in the shadows and start fiercely fighting back. The heavy, reinforced cathedral doors swung violently open to reveal the freezing, howling northern winds. A truly magnificent royal carriage crafted from heavy black iron and polished silver awaited them impatiently outside. 6 massive, exceptionally muscular, midnight black wolves were securely harnessed to the front, growling low in anticipation. William effortlessly and gently lifted Eleanor entirely off the freezing ground and placed her carefully inside the dark carriage. The plush velvet interior was surprisingly warm and fiercely protected from the harsh, biting elements. He quickly climbed in directly after her, sharply signaling the experienced driver to move out immediately. As the heavy carriage jolted forcefully forward, Eleanor looked out the frosted window one last, definitive time. She watched silently as the crumbling, corrupt facade of the Grand Cathedral quickly faded into the heavy, falling snow. She was finally leaving her traumatic, painful past completely and permanently behind her. The abused, forgotten little sister was definitively dead. The powerful, resilient Luna of the North had just officially been born. Inside the rapidly moving carriage, the dense silence was incredibly thick but strangely, wonderfully comfortable. William deliberately did not interrogate her about the ugly, faded scars peeking out from under her tattered sleeves. He did not demand any immediate, stressful answers about her long, lonely time in brutal isolation. He simply poured a generous glass of warm, sweet spiced wine and pressed it gently into her cold hands. "Drink this now," he instructed her softly, his golden eyes carefully scanning her pale, beautiful face. "The harsh journey to the Obsidian Fortress will take too long, exhausting days. You urgently need to rebuild your physical strength for the inevitable trials ahead of us." Eleanor took a small, hesitant sip, deeply feeling the highly soothing heat spread rapidly through her chest. She intimately knew the Obsidian Fortress was an absolutely impenetrable stronghold carved directly into a frozen mountain. It was a notoriously unforgiving place where any form of weakness was strictly and brutally not tolerated. She would inevitably have to quickly prove her true worth to his entire pack, not just to him. But looking at the undeniable, glowing mating mark now permanently resting on her elegant neck, she truly smiled. She was the completely rightful, undisputed Luna, chosen directly by fate and ancient magic itself. And absolutely anyone who foolishly stood in her way would have to deal directly with her terrifying alpha first. The enormous iron gates of the Obsidian Fortress loomed menacingly through the blinding blizzard. Jagged black stone walls rose aggressively into the dark and completely unforgiving sky. This ancient stronghold was entirely carved from the frozen heart of a dead volcano. It was a brutal and merciless environment designed specifically to weed out the weak. The heavy royal carriage finally ground to a screeching halt in the central courtyard. Countless elite northern warriors were already assembled in perfectly disciplined military ranks. Their glowing and highly predatory eyes immediately locked onto the dark wooden door of the carriage. They were fiercely anticipating the arrival of their supreme alpha and his unexpectedly chosen mate. William stepped out first while his heavy leather boots crunched loudly against the frozen earth. The freezing wind violently whipped his short hair and dark cloak around his towering muscular frame. He turned gracefully and gently offered his large hand toward the dark interior of the cabin. Eleanor emerged slowly and stepped carefully into the harsh biting cold of her dangerous new home. She was completely engulfed in William's massive fur-lined cloak to properly ward off the deadly chill. A collective and highly insulting murmur instantly rippled through the assembled elite wolf warriors. They could easily smell the lingering foul scent of abuse and extreme poverty on her fragile skin. To these hardened and battle-scarred veterans she merely looked like a pathetic broken stray. An imposing group of silver-haired pack elders stood firmly at the grand entrance of the main keep. Their wrinkled faces were carved from cold stone and completely devoid of any welcoming warmth. Standing proudly at the absolute forefront was Valeria. She was the fiercely ambitious and highly arrogant daughter of the respected head elder. She wore exquisite pristine white furs that perfectly highlighted her athletic and powerful build. Valeria had aggressively trained her entire life specifically to become William's permanent Luna. Her golden eyes narrowed with intense undisguised hatred as she ruthlessly skinned Eleanor from head to toe. "Is this some kind of twisted joke, Your Grace?" Valeria demanded loudly with aristocratic venom. She deliberately stepped forward to physically block the wide stone staircase leading into the royal keep. The Obsidian Fortress absolutely does not offer warm charity to weak nameless beggars from the corrupt south. William's broad chest vibrated instantly with a sudden lethal growl that promised immediate bloody violence. His golden eyes flashed dangerously as he fully prepared to tear the disrespectful female completely apart. But before the enraged alpha could unleash his raw fury, Eleanor gently placed a restraining hand on his arm. The simple and incredibly calming touch miraculously halted the terrifying duke directly in his tracks. Eleanor deliberately let the heavy velvet hood of her protective cloak fall slowly backward. The freezing mountain wind violently whipped her long dark hair around her pale beautiful face. She stubbornly refused to break eye contact with the hostile and sneering wolf standing intimidatingly above her. She slowly walked past her towering mate and stepped completely out of his massive protective shadow. "I am incredibly familiar with the ancient sacred laws of this noble northern pack," Eleanor stated clearly. Her soft voice was surprisingly steady and carried effortlessly over the loud howling mountain wind. "The oldest ancient decree explicitly states that a wolf's true worth is measured solely by the moon goddess." Valeria sneered deeply and bared her sharp white fangs in a clear pathetic display of unearned dominance. The great moon goddess would never ever bless a fragile broken twig with the sacred power of the frozen north. Eleanor tilted her chin upward with a sudden breathtaking display of pure unyielding regal grace. She deliberately pulled down the high fur-lined collar of her borrowed heavy winter cloak. The brilliant and entirely unmistakable golden mark of the dire wolf glowed fiercely against her pale elegant neck. It rapidly pulsed with a raw terrifying ancient magic that instantly suffocated the entire crowded courtyard. Loud gasps of pure unadulterated shock erupted simultaneously from the surrounding elite warriors. Even the stoic hardened elders violently recoiled backward as if they had been brutally physically struck. The sacred lunar mark had not burned that incredibly brightly in many long-forgotten generations. Valeria's arrogant and highly mocking smirk was instantly permanently wiped from her pale treacherous face. Her proud broad shoulders slumped forward involuntarily under the crushing unbearable weight of the divine magic. "You casually dare to aggressively question the direct undisputed judgment of the moon goddess herself?" Eleanor's soft voice suddenly carried a deeply commanding and entirely irresistible alpha resonance. "You openly dare to block the rightful chosen Luna from freely entering her own sacred ancestral home?" Valeria began to violently tremble as the pure ancient pack magic forcefully commanded her to submit immediately. Her strong knees buckled uncontrollably against the freezing and unforgiving sharp cobblestones. She dropped heavily to the frozen ground and bowed her head deeply in absolute utter humiliation. "Please forgive my profound ignorance, my rightful Luna," Valeria choked out while her voice broke with total defeat. The entire crowded courtyard of hardened lethal warriors immediately followed their defeated champion's lead. Countless massive and deadly wolves dropped respectfully to one knee in perfect silent military synchronization. They bowed deeply to the young supposedly broken woman they had just openly and cruelly mocked. William stood silently in the background while a fiercely proud and deadly smirk played on his handsome lips. He had always known his beautiful mate was incredibly strong, but her terrifying brilliant intellect was a delicious surprise. Eleanor did not rudely gloat, nor did she offer any immediate comforting forgiveness to her fallen challengers. She simply pulled her warm collar back up to firmly shield her sensitive neck from the biting northern cold. "Prepare a boiling hot bath and a secure private war room immediately," Eleanor ordered the kneeling terrified elder council. "We have a highly treasonous shadow council to hunt down and utterly destroy." She gracefully turned and finally began her triumphant confident ascent up the massive frosted stone stairs. William quickly matched her confident stride and moved effortlessly by her side as her lethal devoted shadow. The heavy ancient iron doors of the royal keep opened widely to finally welcome their true absolute master home. The dark imposing halls of the obsidian fortress were dimly illuminated by flickering ancient iron torches. Heavy rich tapestries depicting brutal historical conquests lined the damp freezing stone walls. Eleanor walked confidently through the silent stone corridors, completely ignoring the lingering shocked stares of the servants. She intimately understood that genuine respect in this harsh territory was merely rented and never fully owned. She would inevitably have to constantly fiercely prove her worth every single day to maintain her absolute reigning authority. But as William's heavy calloused hand gently guided her lower back, she felt an indestructible profound sense of purpose. They finally entered a massive highly opulent bedchamber warmly heated by a roaring crackling grand hearth fire. William firmly closed the heavy carved oak doors to instantly cut off the prying judgmental eyes of the outside world. He leaned casually back against the solid dark wood and crossed his heavily muscled arms over his broad chest. "You handled the treacherous head elder's daughter with ruthless and absolute flawless perfection," he praised her softly. Eleanor finally let out a long exhausted breath and allowed her incredibly rigid posture to slightly relax. I merely weaponized their own archaic rigid laws directly against their blind stupid arrogance. The corrupt Silver Moon clan always relied heavily on deceit, but the true North only respects undeniable brute strength. I simply needed to show them a completely different and highly refined kind of unyielding mental power. William pushed smoothly off the wooden door and closed the distance between them with slow, mesmerizing predatory grace. You are inevitably going to be a truly magnificent and terrifying queen, Eleanor. He gently cupped her pale, tired face with his extremely large and incredibly warm, rough hands. But right now, within these heavily guarded private walls, you absolutely do not have to fight anymore. The heavy oak doors of their private chamber completely muffled the howling blizzard outside. Warmth from the roaring hearth cast dancing golden shadows across the ancient stone walls. William remained standing incredibly close to his newly claimed and fiercely protected mate. His imposing presence entirely commanded the quiet intimacy of the dimly lit room. Eleanor finally allowed her tense muscles to relax slightly under his unwavering watchful gaze. She gently reached up to touch the raised golden mark pulsing softly on her elegant neck. The ancient defensive magic still hummed pleasantly beneath her pale and scarred skin. It was a permanent testament to her sudden and highly dramatic rise to absolute power. You have absolutely nothing left to fear, William whispered with profound fierce devotion. He gently brushed a stray lock of dark hair away from her deeply exhausted eyes. No one will ever dare to lay a malicious hand on you again without losing their life. Eleanor leaned slightly into his comforting warmth and offered a small genuine smile. But her exceedingly harsh upbringing had deeply ingrained a constant sense of wariness into her soul. She knew perfectly well that lasting peace was merely a fleeting illusion in their violent world. A sudden sharp knock on the heavy door instantly shattered the fragile romantic tranquility. William immediately dropped his hand and shifted back into a highly lethal guarded stance. State your business immediately, the Alpha commanded with a low, dangerous territorial growl. A timid and highly respectful female voice answered softly through the thick polished wood. I have brought the evening meal for the Luna exactly as the kitchen was instructed. William strode confidently across the room and forcefully unbolted the heavy iron latch. A young servant girl entered with her head bowed in a display of deep apparent submission. She carried a polished silver tray loaded with roasted meat and a crystal decanter of dark wine. Eleanor watched the girl approach with highly trained and ruthlessly calculating eyes. Years of surviving on stolen scraps had drastically heightened her primal survival instincts. She immediately noticed the servant's hands trembling slightly beneath the heavy silver tray. It was not the typical nervous shaking caused by an alpha's naturally intimidating presence. It was the rigid and highly calculated tension of a desperate hunter preparing to strike. The girl set the tray down on a small wooden table near the roaring hearth fire. She quickly poured a generous glass of the rich ruby wine for the unsuspecting new Luna. Drink and restore your strength, my lady, the servant urged with a voice that sounded entirely too eager. Eleanor stepped gracefully forward but deliberately paused before touching the ornate crystal glass. A very faint and highly unnatural scent drifted upward from the swirling dark liquid. It smelled deceptively like bitter almonds mixed with crushed frozen hemlock roots. Eleanor immediately recognized the rare and highly lethal toxin from her dark agonizing past. It was a highly favored weapon of elite assassins operating deep within the corrupt southern territories. Do not dare touch that, Eleanor ordered with a sudden chilling and commanding sharpness. William instantly materialized at her side with his massive muscles coiled for immediate extreme violence. The servant girl violently realized her deadly deception had been completely and utterly exposed. She permanently abandoned her timid act and swiftly drew a jagged poisoned blade from her apron. She lunged desperately forward, aiming the lethal weapon directly at Eleanor's unprotected chest. But the desperate assassin was woefully unprepared for the sheer blinding speed of a fully awakened alpha. William forcefully intercepted the strike with a brutal and entirely effortless backhand swing. The sheer kinetic force of his blow sent the false servant crashing violently against the rigid stone wall. Her deadly poisoned dagger clattered uselessly and loudly across the polished wooden floorboards. William securely pinned the gasping assassin by her throat and lifted her entirely off the ground. His glowing golden eyes blazed with an apocalyptic fury that promised a slow, terrifying, agonizing death. "Tell me exactly who sent you," William roared while applying terrifying, crushing pressure to her windpipe. The defeated assassin merely spat a disgusting mouthful of dark blood onto his pristine leather armor. She twisted her head sharply to the side and deliberately bit down hard on a hidden cyanide tooth. Her fragile body violently convulsed once before going completely limp in the Duke's massive, merciless grip. William cursed viciously and tossed the lifeless body casually aside like discarded, meaningless trash. He immediately turned in a panic to inspect Eleanor for any hidden scratches or tiny injuries. "I am entirely unharmed and perfectly safe," she assured him while stepping carefully over the shattered wine glass. She knelt gracefully beside the dead assassin and coldly pulled back the girl's blood-stained collar. A sinister black tattoo of a tightly coiled serpent was deeply branded into the pale dead flesh. "The Shadow Council," Eleanor whispered knowingly while gently tracing the raised angry scar. "Your treacherous ex-bride did not act alone in planning your younger brother's bloody assassination. They have already deeply infiltrated your trusted inner circle while you were away fighting distant wars." William stared blankly at the dark mark with raw, unadulterated hatred violently burning in his broad chest. "I will personally and methodically purge every single traitor hiding within these impenetrable fortress walls." He turned aggressively toward the door to summon his elite royal executioners for a massive immediate bloodbath. "Wait," Eleanor commanded softly while placing a remarkably firm hand on his broad, rigid shoulder. William paused reluctantly and looked down at his fiercely intelligent mate with clear, aggressive confusion. "If you blindly slaughter them now, the remaining rats will simply retreat back into the comfortable shadows. We urgently need to completely expose their entire subterranean hidden network at the exact same time." Eleanor looked directly into his fierce golden eyes with an absolute and terrifyingly calm resolve. "We must strategically use me as the perfect, irresistible bait to draw them all out into the open." William let out a deafening, furious roar that physically and violently shook the solid bedroom walls. "I will absolutely never ever allow you to willingly place yourself in direct mortal danger." He aggressively pulled her flush against his solid chest in a fiercely territorial and protective embrace. "I just miraculously found you and I refuse to ever risk losing you to these cowardly, pathetic traitors." Eleanor rested her cheek softly against his rapidly beating heart and sighed with profound affection. She intimately understood his primal biological wolf need to protect his newly claimed mate at absolutely all costs. But she also strategically knew that true reigning leadership required making ruthlessly pragmatic and dangerous decisions. "They firmly and foolishly believe I am just a weak, pathetic victim from a broken, ruined family," she reasoned calmly. "Let them confidently continue to severely underestimate my physical strength and my tactical intellect. We will strategically stage a grand, highly public banquet to officially celebrate my arrival and our union. The remaining hidden traitors will inevitably try desperately to finish what this pathetic assassin just started. And when they finally arrogantly strike, we will brutally trap them all in a flawless, inescapable cage." William stared intently down at her with a profound, intoxicating mixture of deep awe and lingering, agonizing dread. He had initially expected to marry a fragile, delicate flower that constantly needed shielding from the incoming storm. Instead, he had fundamentally and permanently bonded with a brilliant, lethal strategist who openly welcomed the thunder. "You are incredibly dangerous and entirely terrifying," William murmured while pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. "Which is exactly why I am the absolute only Luna truly capable of ruling by your dominant side," she replied smoothly. The massive great hall of the obsidian fortress was transformed into a blinding spectacle of wealth and raw power. Thousands of thick wax candles burned brightly in ancient iron chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceiling. Long, heavy oak tables groaned under the immense weight of roasted meats and exotic winter fruits. Every elite noble and high-ranking warrior of the Northern Pack was strictly mandated to attend this sudden celebration. They were officially gathered to honor their formidable Alpha and his highly unexpected new Luna. But beneath the loud music and forced laughter lay an incredibly thick undercurrent of lethal tension. William sat motionless at the elevated high table like a coiled, terrifying apex predator. His massive muscular frame was draped in ceremonial black furs and heavy silver armor. His glowing golden eyes meticulously tracked every single-minute movement within the crowded cavernous hall. Eleanor sat gracefully right beside him, radiating an absolutely untouchable and dangerous regal calm. She wore a breathtaking gown woven from midnight blue silk and delicate pure silver thread. Her long dark hair was elegantly pinned up to deliberately expose her scarred but beautifully marked neck. The brilliant golden crest of the Northern Pack pulsed continuously with a highly intimidating ancient magic. She held a jeweled silver goblet loosely in her small hands while her sharp eyes scanned the smiling faces below. She knew intimately that the deadly assassins of the Hidden Shadow Council were currently hiding in plain sight. They were desperately waiting for the perfect chaotic moment to violently strike down the supposed weak link. "They are becoming highly restless and extremely anxious," William murmured softly without ever moving his lips. "The intense aroma of fresh blood always makes cornered rats extremely clumsy and careless," Eleanor replied with a soft, chilling smile. The grand banquet slowly progressed through endless heavy courses and highly hypocritical public toasts. Several minor corrupt lords stepped forward to boldly pledge their supposedly eternal and unwavering loyalty. Eleanor accepted their empty, deceitful praises with flawless grace and highly calculated political poise. She deliberately feigned a slight delicate physical weariness to deeply encourage the lurking impatient traitors. She slowly set her heavy silver goblet down and gently massaged her pale temples with a slender hand. It was the exact subtle prearranged tactical signal they had secretly agreed upon behind closed doors. A sudden deliberate violent commotion abruptly erupted near the massive heavy oak kitchen doors. 3 highly decorated royal guards abruptly broke strict military formation and sprinted rapidly toward the high table. Their drawn jagged steel swords gleamed wickedly under the warm yellow flickering candlelight. For the true ancient purity of the Northern bloodline, the lead traitor screamed with absolute fanatical madness. The entire crowded hall instantly erupted into sheer absolute deafening terror and chaotic panic. Unarmed wealthy nobles violently scrambled backward, knocking over heavy wooden chairs and spilling dark ruby wine. The charging rogue assassins were incredibly fast and deeply enhanced by some dark, highly illegal magic. They completely ignored the towering enraged Alpha and aimed their lethal vicious strikes entirely at the seated Luna. They foolishly and fatally believed she would simply freeze in absolute paralyzing mortal terror. But Eleanor absolutely did not scream, and she certainly did not frantically cower behind her muscular mate. She calmly reached beneath the heavy elegant silk folds of her magnificent midnight gown. She smoothly drew a sleek heavily enchanted silver dagger William had personally crafted and gifted her. She parried the first deadly downward strike with a sheer shocking display of brutal unexpected core strength. The sharp deafening sound of violently clashing metal echoed sharply over the terrified screaming crowd. William did not even bother to draw his massive terrifying ceremonial broadsword from its thick leather sheath. He simply launched his entire massive muscular body directly over the heavy loaded oak table. He violently intercepted the second rapid assassin mid-air with a terrifying, sickening, bone-crushing impact. He drove the struggling traitor brutally into the solid cold stone floor, completely shattering his rib cage. The third desperate assassin frantically tried to pivot away from the terrifying, deeply enraged Duke. He blindly and recklessly lunged at Eleanor from a highly disadvantaged, awkward side angle. Eleanor smoothly sidestepped the clumsy, desperate attack with flawless, fluid, highly deadly grace. She ruthlessly drove her enchanted pure silver dagger deeply into the vulnerable, unprotected gap of his leather armor. The dark, foul, illegal magic deeply embedded inside his corrupted veins violently reacted to the pure, blessed silver. He dropped incredibly heavily to his knees while desperately choking on thick, dark, unnatural, toxic blood. The entire chaotic, desperate assassination attempt was completely and brutally crushed almost instantly. Absolute heavy, terrifying silence immediately crashed down upon the stunned, bloody Grand Great Hall. William slowly stood up to his full, towering, deeply terrifying physical height. His massive broad chest heaved heavily with highly suppressed and extremely violent protective alpha rage. He mercilessly dragged the only barely surviving assassin by his dark hair and threw him aggressively at Eleanor's feet. The defeated, broken traitor violently spat warm, foul blood onto the beautiful, expensive imported woven rug. He glared viciously up at the stunning young Luna with pure, unadulterated, venomous, burning hatred. "The Shadow Council will absolutely never ever stop relentlessly hunting you down," the broken guard hissed maliciously. Eleanor looked calmly down at the bleeding, dying man with an absolutely chilling and highly terrifying lack of pity. She deliberately stepped elegantly over the spreading dark blood slowly pooling on the clean, cold stone floor. "You deeply and fundamentally misunderstood the core purpose of this grand, elaborate celebration," Eleanor stated softly. Her clear, highly commanding voice echoed ominously through the completely silent, utterly terrified room. "I absolutely did not carelessly host this expensive banquet merely to warmly introduce myself to your pathetic hidden cult. I deliberately and specifically invited you all here tonight to securely lock the heavy fortress doors entirely from the inside." She slowly raised her elegant pale hand and forcefully snapped her delicate fingers with a sharp echoing crack. Instantly over 50 deeply hidden elite archers simultaneously emerged from the high, dark, shadowed balconies above. They all held massive, heavy loaded crossbows aimed directly down at specific targeted nobles shivering in the frantic crowd. These specific nervous lords and ladies had subtly reacted with slight joyful anticipation when the desperate assassins first charged. Eleanor's highly trained, incredibly perceptive eyes had meticulously recorded every single treacherous twitch and hidden micro-expression. Every single cowardly person who secretly smiled during that pathetic attack will now be immediately escorted directly to the deep, dark dungeons. William fiercely and proudly stepped up right beside her and gently wrapped a heavy, deeply protective arm securely around her slender waist. He looked down at the completely trapped and deeply terrified exposed traitors with a feral, highly bloodthirsty alpha grin. "The massive, terrifying and absolute bloody purge of the vast northern pack officially begins tonight," William roared commandingly. The heavy, solid iron doors of the Grand Great Hall were violently and permanently sealed shut, entirely trapping the deeply guilty inside. The heavy iron doors remained sealed against the howling blizzard outside. Inside the Great Hall, the atmosphere had shifted from a celebration to a chilling tribunal. Dozens of previously arrogant nobles now kneeled forcefully on the cold stone. Elite royal guards stripped them of their hidden weapons and silk cloaks. William paced slowly before the captive audience like a caged predator anticipating the kill. His short hair bristled with barely contained fury. His tall and strong physique entirely dominated the center of the room. Eleanor sat completely still on her elevated carved wooden throne. She observed the terrified captives with calculating precision. She refused to let any trace of sympathy soften her sharp features. These were the very people who had secretly plotted to end her life moments ago. A portly man with a trembling jaw was dragged forward by his velvet collar. He was Baron Thorn, an overseer of the southern trade routes. Thorn collapsed onto his stomach and pressed his sweating forehead against the floorboards. "Mercy, my lord," Thorn sobbed into the dark stone. "I was coerced into this madness by the treacherous Silver Moon clan." William stopped pacing and stood directly over the weeping nobleman. "You have always been a coward, Thorn," William stated with a deceptively quiet voice. "But even cowards know better than to strike blindly at a reigning alpha." Eleanor stood up gracefully from her throne and descended the short flight of stairs. Her midnight blue silk gown whispered against the polished stone steps. She approached the kneeling Baron and looked down at him with unyielding authority. "The Shadow Council does not recruit cowards without offering a substantial reward," Eleanor noted sharply. "What exactly did Silas promise you to betray your sworn blood oath to the North?" Thorn hesitated, his shifting eyes darting toward the other captive conspirators. William unleashed a bone-rattling growl that instantly shattered the Baron's resolve. He promised us access to the ancient subterranean magic reserves. Thorn blurted out frantically. The Shadow Council believes the Moon Goddess hid her original power deep beneath the obsidian fortress. Eleanor frowned slightly, processing the monumental implication of his desperate confession. The North was not just a strategic military stronghold. It was a sacred vault protecting a dangerous primal energy. They needed you dead, William, Thorn continued while gasping for air. Your ruling bloodline is the only magical lock keeping that ancient power safely contained. William's sharp jaw tightened as an old profound grief flared in his golden eyes. My younger brother, William whispered, his voice cracking with sudden realization. He did not die because he was caught in a random border skirmish. Thorn shook his head rapidly while tears streamed down his wrinkled face. Your brother discovered the mining tunnels the Shadow Council was secretly digging. He found proof that Silas and the Southern Lords were actively stealing the magic. Victoria was sent explicitly to silence him before he could bring that proof back to you. A wave of suffocating sorrow erupted from William's rigid body. The invisible force of his aura cracked the thick glass windows lining the high hall. He reached down and grabbed Thorn by the throat, lifting him effortlessly into the air. William was completely lost in a blinding red haze of agonizing long-buried grief. He was fully prepared to snap the traitor's neck and slaughter everyone in the room. William, look at me, Eleanor commanded. Her voice cut cleanly through the deafening chaos of his violent mental storm. She stepped directly into his personal space, entirely ignoring his lethal radiating aura. She placed both of her hands firmly on either side of his tense jaw. Do not let their past treachery turn you into a mindless monster tonight, she urged softly. Her touch acted as an immediate grounding anchor for his spiraling soul. William blinked rapidly as the blinding red haze faded from his glowing eyes. He dropped the gasping Baron back onto the floor in a crumpled heap. He leaned his forehead heavily against Eleanor's, drawing vital strength from her resilience. They slaughtered him like an animal to steal our birthright, William rasped brokenly. And now we will make them pay for every single drop of his spilled blood, Eleanor promised him. She turned her fierce gaze back toward the trembling remaining captives. Lock these traitors deep within the lowest levels of the dungeons, the Luna commanded the guards. Let them rot in absolute darkness until we decide their final execution. The royal guards immediately hauled the sobbing nobles away without any hesitation. Eleanor looked back up at her towering mate, her eyes burning with newfound strategic purpose. We can no longer merely defend our borders from these cowardly hidden attacks. We must march south and completely eradicate the Silver Moon clan from existence. William straightened his broad shoulders, his lethal composure fully restored. We ride for war at dawn. Dawn painted the frozen horizon in streaks of violet and ash. The northern pack descended from the snowy mountains like an unstoppable avalanche. William rode at the absolute front of the armored vanguard. His tall and strong physique cast a long commanding shadow over the frosted earth. Short hair whipped fiercely against his forehead in the biting morning wind. Eleanor rode right beside him on a sleek muscular silver mare. She wore dark customized leather armor forged specifically for a reigning Luna. The relentless journey south was incredibly swift and completely unyielding. They met almost zero resistance while crossing the vast border valleys. The southern soldiers were soft from years of comfortable peace and deep corrupt wealth. They dropped their polished weapons and scattered the exact moment the northern banners appeared. The sun climbed higher, revealing the towering white marble walls of the Silver Moon estate looming ahead. Silas had desperately barricaded his ornate heavy iron gates. He foolishly believed thick metal could actually stop a grieving Alpha. William did not even order his massive siege engineers to step forward. He dismounted his dark warhorse with fluid, lethal grace. He walked calmly toward the reinforced iron gates completely alone. His heavy fists slammed into the center hinges with the raw, devastating force of a falling meteorite. The intricate ironwork groaned loudly, buckled sharply, and violently shattered inward. Northern warriors flooded rapidly into the pristine courtyards like a dark, suffocating tide. Wealthy southern lords screamed in terror and frantically scrambled over manicured rose bushes to escape. Eleanor dismounted smoothly and walked straight through the ruined gates with her head held high. William waited patiently for her, matching his determined stride to hers as they entered the main keep. The grand spacious foyer of the Silver Moon clan was dripping in stolen sickening opulence. Silas stood trembling violently at the absolute top of the grand marble staircase. He frantically clutched a jeweled ceremonial staff that suddenly looked like a fragile wooden twig. His remaining loyal personal guards instantly dropped to their knees upon making eye contact with William. The overwhelming, suffocating pressure of the true alpha forced them into immediate involuntary submission. Silas was suddenly left standing completely alone, stripped bare of his artificial borrowed power. He looked down at his youngest discarded daughter with wide, panic-stricken eyes. "Eleanor, my sweet beautiful child," Silas choked out, attempting a sickeningly sweet tone. "You have finally returned home to your warm, loving family." Eleanor paused gracefully at the base of the stairs and let out a cold, sharp laugh. The piercing sound echoed off the delicate crystal chandeliers exactly like breaking glass. "I am definitely not your child, and this corrupt mansion was never a true home," she stated firmly. She began ascending the smooth marble steps with slow, deliberate, hunting precision. William stayed firmly planted at the bottom, folding his arms casually over his muscular chest. He was deliberately allowing her to completely own this vital overdue moment of retribution. "I am the undisputed Luna of the Northern Pack, and I bring only the biting winter wind." Silas stumbled clumsily backward, his wrinkled face draining rapidly of all remaining color. "You absolutely cannot do this to your own sacred blood," the patriarch pleaded desperately. "I gave you precious life, and I graciously raised you within these very walls." Eleanor quickly closed the remaining distance and snatched the ceremonial staff right from his sweating hands. She snapped the ancient cursed wood right over her armored knee in one swift fluid motion. "You gave me a dark freezing corner to sleep in and dirty scraps from your hound's bowls. You beat me mercilessly to ensure your eldest daughter always looked superior. You maliciously framed me for murder specifically to cover your own treasonous magical theft." Every single true accusation rang out crystal clear for the surviving nobility to absorb. "You coward ordered the bloody assassination of an innocent brother just to feed your bottomless greed." Silas fell heavily to his knees, finally realizing all of his darkest secrets were fully exposed. "The Shadow Council forced my hand against my will," he wailed loudly, pointing a shaking finger. "They violently threatened to burn the entire estate if I did not blindly comply with the tunnel excavations." Eleanor looked down at the pathetic, weeping man who had haunted her childhood nightmares for a decade. She felt absolutely no anger anymore, only a profound, freezing, unbreakable apathy. "A true honorable leader dies bravely protecting their pack, Silas. You cowardly chose to sell your soul just to keep your velvet cushions soft." She raised her pale hand, boldly exposing the brilliant golden wolf mark burning fiercely on her neck. "By the ancient undisputed right of conquest and the direct will of the Moon Goddess, I strip you of your rank. The Silver Moon clan is hereby permanently dissolved and completely absorbed into the ruling North." Silas gasped desperately for air as the ancient ancestral magic violently ripped itself directly from his veins. He collapsed entirely into a weak, sobbing heap on the cold marble landing. Eleanor turned her back completely on him without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. She walked steadily back down the stairs toward the waiting, profoundly proud gaze of her alpha. The first crucial stage of their bloody righteous vengeance was flawlessly complete. But the true sinister leaders of the Shadow Council were still lurking cowardly in the royal capital. William reached out warmly and pulled her flush against his solid, unyielding chest. "You are absolutely magnificent," he whispered affectionately against the dark crown of her head. "We are just getting started," she replied smoothly, looking past the ruined doors toward the distant royal city. The Shadow Council's deep poisonous network extended directly into the king's own inner royal court. Victoria was merely an expendable brainless pawn, and Silas was just a convenient blind tool. The true hidden masterminds were currently sitting on gilded thrones, entirely unaware of the incoming storm. Eleanor mounted her silver mare again, her sharp eyes locked permanently onto the southern horizon. She had survived the darkest isolating depths of despair, and now she was bringing the abyss directly to her enemies. William mounted his massive warhorse, sharply signaling the vanguard to prepare for the final, brutal push. There would be absolutely no mercy, no polite negotiations, and zero surviving witnesses when they finally reached the capital. The royal capital of the realm burned beneath a bleeding twilight sky. Thick plumes of ash choked the previously pristine cobblestone avenues. The northern vanguard tore through the outer city defenses with unmatched ferocity. William rode his dark warhorse directly toward the towering palace gates. His tall and strong physique absorbed the fading ambient light. Short hair framed a face carved from absolute unyielding resolve. Eleanor rode perfectly synchronized beside him on her pale silver mare. She was no longer the fragile forgotten outcast of the provinces. She was a conquering queen delivering righteous doom to a deeply corrupted throne. The elite palace guards threw down their gilded weapons and fled. They instantly recognized the lethal intent radiating from the legendary Alpha. William dismounted and shattered the grand throne room doors with one brutal kick. The cavernous hall was entirely cloaked in suffocating unnatural shadows. A vile freezing mist slithered menacingly across the polished marble floor. This was the ancient dark magic Silas had frantically confessed to. Sitting comfortably upon the stolen throne was Lord Malachi. He was the king's trusted advisor and the true hidden architect of the Shadow Council. Malachi wore robes spun from woven darkness and stolen lunar energy. He smiled a sickeningly calm smile at the invading northern rulers. "You are incredibly bold to walk directly into my absolute domain," Malachi sneered. He raised a twisted wooden staff pulsing with sickening purple venom. "The northern magic you blindly protect rightfully belongs to the Ascended Council." Dark tendrils of pure shadow suddenly erupted from the freezing floorboards. They shot forward like vipers aiming directly for William's broad chest. The Alpha roared and drew his heavy silver broadsword. He cleaved through the shadowy manifestations with blinding brute force. But the dark magic simply reformed and multiplied with every vicious strike. Malachi laughed as the suffocating shadows slowly began to encircle the mighty Duke. He foolishly believed brute physical strength was completely useless against ancient sorcery. He fundamentally underestimated the young woman standing quietly by the ruined doors. Eleanor stepped forward into the swirling vortex of lethal dark mist. She did not draw a blade or raise her voice in panic. She simply closed her eyes and tapped directly into the pure ancestral bond. The golden dire wolf mark on her neck ignited with the brilliance of a falling star. A blinding shockwave of pure silver light exploded outward from her slender body. The ancient lunar magic effortlessly vaporized the creeping shadows upon contact. Malachi shrieked in sudden agony as his dark illusions instantly crumbled to dust. The stolen power within his staff cracked violently under the supreme divine pressure. Eleanor opened her eyes and locked a freezing commanding gaze on the false lord. "Your stolen borrowed power is absolutely nothing against the true moon goddess." Her soft voice echoed through the vast hall with undeniable terrifying authority. The sudden destruction of the shadows left Malachi completely unprotected and vulnerable. William did not waste a single fraction of a second. He crossed the immense throne room in 3 terrifying predatory strides. He grabbed the terrified lord by his intricate velvet collar. He hoisted Malachi effortlessly into the air with one massive scarred hand. "You orchestrated the cowardly murder of my blood," William growled softly. The sheer lethal proximity of the enraged Alpha paralyzed the Dark Sorcerer completely. Malachi gasped for breath while his feet dangled uselessly above the marble. "Killing me will fundamentally shatter the entire kingdom's political foundation," Malachi choked out. Eleanor ascended the dais and stood directly before the captured traitor. "We did not march all this way to politely negotiate politics," she stated coldly. "We came here to completely burn the corrupted foundation to the ground." She reached out and snatched the cracked wooden staff from his trembling grip. She smashed it against the stone steps, shattering the crystal core permanently. The Dark Council's magical grip over the royal capital was officially broken. William tightened his massive grip around the traitor's fragile neck. He looked directly at his brilliant mate, waiting for her final judgment. The grand oppressive throne room was now completely silent except for Malachi's ragged breathing. Eleanor slowly drew her enchanted silver dagger from its leather sheath. She stepped intimately close to the man who had ordered endless suffering. "My husband claims your life for his murdered brother," she whispered with deadly calm. "And I claim your legacy for every victim you crushed beneath your ambition." She nodded once to the towering Alpha standing rigidly beside her. William snapped the sorcerer's neck with a sharp, sickening crack that echoed into eternity. The lifeless body of the Shadow Council's true leader dropped heavily to the floor. The sprawling southern kingdom was finally entirely devoid of its hidden parasitic rot. William turned slowly and extended his blooded hand toward his resilient Luna. The empty Iron Throne waited patiently in the shadows behind them.